Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your audio amigo, here today with another showcase video for you guys. This time we're going to be looking at another digital audio player, this time from TempoTec, a well-known manufacturer of dongles, DACs, and players. This rather sleek-looking little guy is the new Variations V1, as you can see there, a new HiBy OS-enabled player priced at a very competitive $80 US, featuring a full set of playback controls, balanced output, and some streaming options. Is the V1 here the new sub $100 default recommendation, or does it need a little more time in the oven? Well, let's find out. Quick disclaimer before we get started, I purchased this player with my own money, but about a week ago, TempoTec reached out and offered me a unit for review. I told them I had already bought my unit, and they asked me for my order number, and they refunded me the cost of my order, making this a review sample. As usual, I am not being paid for this review, but because I could turn around and sell this if I wanted to, I've gone ahead and activated the paid promotion feature here on YouTube. I do these disclaimers because I believe in full transparency when there's potential bias besides my own personal taste at play. Thank you so much to TempoTec for refunding me the purchase price, and thank you to all of you watching for your continued support. As is typical for a budget player like this, the unboxing experience is quite simple. You get the player front and center with a screen protector pre-applied. You get a useful little card telling you how to unlock the volume limit, which will be important if you're going to be listening to larger headphones on this. You also get a manual, which is still in the box. You get a USB A to C cable. You get a USB C to C cable for DAC use. You get a second screen protector in case the first one gets damaged or you just want to replace it for some reason. And that's it. I ordered as part of the first wave of orders, and I was given this little clip case here. It's a little plastic guy that goes on the player like so. This, I believe, is a $15 add-on. They also have a $20 green leather case. I'll put up a picture over here. That looks pretty sleek, but both of the cases are sold separately, so if you do want a case for the V1, you'll have to pay minimum $15 or $20 extra to get one. Overall, this is pretty typical included accessories for an $80 player like this. I don't typically ask for much more. I think a cloth carry pouch would have been a nice addition, but honestly, for under $100, I think this is just fine. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at the unit itself. The V1, as you can see here, is a all-metal construction with plastic buttons and a glass front plate. The front plate, as you can see, has a screen protector installed from the factory, no bubbles or anything, which is really nice to see. The player itself is all black with no other colors available, at least at the moment. I'd like to see some other colors, kind of like the HiBy ones offer. The screen really only takes up like the top, I'm going to say 5/8 of the front of the device, which is not a fantastic screen to body ratio. The bottom of the player is just a sort of featureless black panel with the logo on the right side and the file quality light on the left. It's a bit of a head scratcher as to why the player is the size it is and the screen is so small. My guess would be they wanted to make a low-cost player with a large battery, and cutting down on the screen size was a big savings for them. It does make it look a little bit more awkward, and it makes driving the touch screen quite awkward as well, but more on that later. Overall, I don't hate the looks on the front of the unit. I just wish the screen just took up more of the space here. The top of the unit features the 3.5 and 4.4 millimeter outputs. That 4.4 is a full balanced output. It's not just a convenience 4.4, but we'll talk more about that in the specifications section. The right side of the player features your transport controls. You have the power button as well. It's nice to see a separate power button than just having it integrated into the play pause, which some other players like to do. The bottom features a USB C connector and not much else. The left side has your volume up and down controls as well as the SD card slot. The back has this metal plate here that's held in by a screw up here, and there's a little orange gap there that matches the orange gap on the box. This back is rather easily removed. It's only held in by that screw and some glue. Underneath it will reveal the battery. I'll go ahead and pull up a picture here. It is replaceable. It is soldered in, however, so replacement is going to involve some wick and some flux and a soldering iron, as opposed to the easy battery swap on something like the Retro Nano, for example. I really want to see more companies adopt an easily swappable sort of standard battery type in devices like this. The buttons on the unit itself do feel a little bit plasticky, but in all honesty, they're pretty solid. They don't really wiggle themselves around like on some other players. and pressing them has a nice solid feeling to them. You can feel a sort of click for each one. Not like full-on micro switch levels of click, but a pretty decent click, I would say. It's not an awful feeling membrane for sure. As you can see, the buttons do have raised logos on them, which I do like. However, when you're working this in a pocket, for example, you can't really tell with just your fingers what each shape is. They all sort of blend together. If they had only kept the raised indicators on one or maybe two of the buttons, it would have been a lot easier in the pocket to tell, okay, where's the raised bump? Okay, that's play pause, which means that's next track, that's previous track, and that's, the power button up here with its own bump there. It's a minor thing. I'm a big proponent of having a player be perfectly operatable in a pocket, so it's just something that, I would notice. Thankfully, however, the volume buttons are on the other side of the player, minimizing sort of errors when, wanting to turn up or down the volume. The buttons are oriented nicely for one-handed operation. You can do the volume with the left with the pointer finger here and everything else with the thumb. The next track button is a little far down for my taste. If I'm holding the player roughly like this, I have to scoot the whole player down awkwardly to hit the next track button there. Not ideal for me. The V1, however, does meet my criteria for a pocket use player. I can adjust the volume, go forward or back a track, as well as play pause, all in my pocket, all fairly easily. As I said, I just wish that the raised indentations here were a bit more usable in a pocket. What I will say is no other player at this price point has full transport controls and separate volume control, at least of the ones that I have tried. So even with that minor flaw with all the raised symbols there, it is a step ahead of the competition. The screen to body ratio is a bit of a bummer, as is the soldered in sort of more difficultly replaceable battery, but the latter is basically typical of every other audio player these days. So overall, I would say that the design is pretty solid. Let's go ahead and pull up the specifications here for the V1. I don't have any idea what SoC the V1 is using. There was nothing listed on their website or anywhere on the box, but seeing as it is running HiBy OS, I would assume it is a variant of the 1600 or 1600E SoC from either Lumicil or Ngenic, as that's what powers most of the other HiBy OS players in my collection. The screen here is a 2-inch IPS touch panel with a resolution of 240 by 320, and it matches the Echo Mini for the smallest screen on a player that I currently own. The unit features a pair of Cirrus Logic CS43131 DAC chips with no listed amplification chips. The maximum rated output is 215 milliwatts over the balanced connector, making this less beefy than the Echo Mini but twice as powerful as the HiBy R1. There is no internal storage on this unit, but it does support SD cards up to 2 terabytes in size in that slot. Media scanning, in my experience, wasn't too bad. It didn't crash during the process, which is all I really care about. The unit does feature Bluetooth 5.1 and functions both as a broadcast device that you can use as a wireless dongle or a Bluetooth headphone, and as a receiver, so you can use it as a Bluetooth dongle for your phone if you wanted to. It supports aptX and LDAC, which is nice to see on a player under $100. The overall weight is just under 70 grams, which I think is nice and low for this price point, and the rather large battery at 1400 milliamp hours is best in class in this price range as well. TempoTec does not list any battery life claims on their website, but I was able to get right about 12 hours of charge out of my standard sort of KPH30i at 78 decibels testing volume in high gain mode. You can probably get a little bit more than that out of some IEMs in low gain mode, so overall I would say it's a pretty solid in terms of battery life. Compared to the other players in the price range, the specs are interesting in that it has the dual DAC chips that the Echo Mini has, while having the OS and processor of the HiBy R1. So we'll see what that combo works like in the next section. The user experience here on the Variations V1 is fairly straightforward, especially if you've driven a HiBy OS device before. Before I get into that, I want to talk about some experiences that I've seen people talking about on both HeadFi and on the Digital Audio Players subreddit. I've actually had a fairly trouble-free experience with my V1, even on the stock 1.0 firmware. This appears to be in contrast to a lot of folks online who are experiencing constant crashes, freezes, hangs, audio issues, and other things wrong with this player. I know a bunch of people's EQ didn't work. The odd thing for me is that I didn't really experience any of those issues. But I'm not about to ignore all of these people online saying all of these things with perfectly, screenshots and receipts and all their stories. The experience has gotten more stable with the 1.1 version of the firmware, which I did update to as soon as it was available, and I've been running for quite a while. For that reason, what I'll suggest is if you do decide that you're interested in one of these players, as soon as you get it in, I would update my firmware as soon as possible, just to avoid any potential headaches that you might have. I've been sort of daily driving this player for a month, and that includes a sort of week-and-a-half long trip involving 4 flights where this was my main audio device and my only audio device. And that entire time, like I said, it's been honestly pretty trouble-free for me. But I didn't want to say this, hey, this is great, it worked great for me in this review when I know so many people online have been having issues with it. So I just wanted to give those people a voice. Things are sort of getting sorted out on the firmware side of things. But yeah, just get this player and immediately update the firmware. Hopefully you won't have any problems like I did. Just be aware that the stock firmware especially is kind of buggy for a good amount of people. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the interface itself. When playing music, the screensaver defaults to this sort of album art screen with the time there on the bottom. You then slide up to unlock, and here's sort of where my first problem with this happens. I see the size of the screen and I want to slide in from the bottom. And as you can see, if I touch the bottom half, the first time it didn't work, the second time it did work. It only registers that motion, I would say 50% of the time. There, you failed there, and that time it took. That's just annoying, so what I end up having to do actually is just turn the screensaver off, because it reduces the amount of motions that I need to do to, for example, add that song to my favorites, which I did there just easily like that. Now that we're looking at the now playing screen, you can see the album art is on display there. That is a speed setting, which we'll talk about a little bit later. That star is how you add things to favorite. That is the type of file and the quality that it's playing at. That is the song title. That is the artist. You have your transport controls down here. That lets you choose between playing the files in a row, repeat, shuffle, all those settings. This is a little menu that lets you manage the song that's playing. You can pull it up, what playlist it's in. You can add it to a playlist. You can check out the album it's from, see the properties of the file, or delete it if you're the kind of person that likes managing your collection sort of on the fly. You can scrub through the song by using your finger here, if you can get your big Mexican finger on the playhead decently well. A lot of my issues with the navigation on this player just come from the screen being way too small and my fingers being rather large. Tapping the screen will display lyrics if you have them embedded into the file. I don't happen to have them for the specific song. Either that or they're in kanji and they don't show up, which I don't know might be a thing. Pulling down from the top, you pull up the sort of shortcuts menu. From the top left, those buttons are Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, DLNA, AirPlay, HiBy Link, or is that MESB? Sorry, that's MESB, that's HiBy Link. That is the switch between low and high gain. Just tap it to switch what you're on. And that is the sleep timer. This is a screen brightness control. You can see you can make it brighter or dimmer. And then that's a duplicate of your transport controls. You can also see the battery percentage, the time, whether or not a file is playing, and your volume up there. Let's go down to 25 just because I'm pedantic. There we go. 25, there we go. So that's that. Let's go ahead and go to the main menu. So the music menu here is fairly standard. You can see all of your songs. You can see the individual files if you want to browse through your files on your SD card. You have albums, artists, you have your playlists and your music settings, which we'll talk about later. It's fairly standard. Your stream media menu, this player supports Tidal and QoBuzz for streaming, as well as DLNA if you have a DLNA server set up in your house, or AirPlay if you want to broadcast music to this using AirPlay. AirPlay did work rather well in my testing, but outside of that, I'm not subscribed to either Tidal or QoBuzz, so I couldn't really test the streaming performance of either of these. Sorry about that. That is phone DAC mode and PC DAC mode, and you can see that hitting that using the included C2C cable, you can essentially use this as a phone dongle. That'll give you all the controls here. You can enable your EQ there. You can set what output mode is, your gain. Fairly straightforward. To get out of this mode, you just come on. You just go back and it will say, do you want to exit DAC mode? Yes. PC DAC is the exact same thing, except for phone mode will use the internal battery to conserve the battery life on your mobile device. PC DAC bypasses the battery so that it doesn't, put any additional cycles on that battery for you. Bluetooth DAC essentially turns this into a Bluetooth wireless dongle. You can connect your phone to this and use it to stream music from your phone, which is a decent use case here. I did do some brief testing with that. The Bluetooth quality was pretty decent. It worked fairly well. I didn't experience any dropouts or issues, and in my range test, it did about as well as a standard set of Bluetooth wireless buds. Okay, so continuing our tour of the menu here, I need to turn that off. It's a good thing I bring that up because in settings, you have two different settings menus. You have the systems menu and the audio settings menu. We'll go ahead and start with the systems menu. This gives you sort of settings on the device itself. So what language the menu is in, your wireless settings, which basically enables Wi-Fi and how to connect to it. Bluetooth, same thing, but for Bluetooth, the backlight setting says how long it stays on, sort of sitting on a table. Font size makes things bigger or smaller, so it's easier to read. USB working mode, you can set it to on-the-go mode or into device mode. Time setting just changes your time zone and your things. Idle shutdown is how long it will sit not playing music before it turns itself off. Sleep shutdown is essentially a sleep timer. Battery percentage just turns on and off whether or not it displays the battery percentage next to the battery indicator up there. LED indicator will turn off that light if you're using this in a dark environment, which is kind of nice. Button operation when screen off means that the button basically functions as a hold button, so none of these buttons will do anything with the screen off, which for someone who operates this in their pocket is never gonna be useful for me. The shortcut menu lets you determine how you pull the shortcut menu up, as well as configure which things you have put on there. You can add crossfade, gapless playback, and other things. You can reconfigure that menu however you'd like. The screensaver setting is where you go to turn off the screensaver if you just want to be able to manage your playback quickly after you pull it out of your pocket. Restore factory settings puts everything back normal. Firmware update, very important, especially if you're on the 1.0 firmware. And then the standard sort of certification about and developer options things. You will need the developer options to unlock the volume on this, especially if you're going to listen to some more demanding headphones. Now, the audio settings. This basically lets you select your output. You have headphone and line out. That 3.5 functions as both if you want to use this to connect to an external amp. That's your high-low gain switch. This is your MSEB, which is HiBy's sort of EQ-ish solution that uses more sort of user-friendly words for people that don't want to mess around with the full PEQ. If you do want to mess around with EQ, even though it's not PEQ, there is a 5-band standard equalizer that you can mess around with here. The digital filters let you choose from several different ones if you're the type of person that likes to mess around with those settings. USB DAC feedback can improve low-level noise if you're using this as a USB DAC on some devices. I didn't have to use that myself. These are options for DSD playback, or if you're playing back a DSD file with this as a DAC. Balance lets you adjust the balance of the sound, and then the SPDIF switch will let you enable the SPDIF output out of that. Those are the settings menu there. There is one more settings menu, but we'll look at that in just a second. So let's go ahead and pull up that music menu. One thing I'll talk about real quick is, as y'all have seen me navigating this player, I tend to use the swipe to go back gesture as opposed to trying to tap the arrow. As you can see, I missed the first tap there. It's just easier for me to navigate using the back swipe than the arrow. I do hit the arrow better now than I did at the beginning, but with the swipe, it's just easier. So, music menu, as I mentioned, you've got typical artist, album, playlist, all that other stuff. But here at the bottom is the music settings menu, which I was talking about earlier. So, at the very top, HiBy Link. That lets you update your library and transfer things from a HiBy Link enabled device. Update database is just how you update the internal song library from the SD card. Music update mode lets you choose how you do that, whether you want to trigger it yourself, you want it to do it automatically every time you insert the card. It will also pick up some MQA stuff, if that's sort of files that you have. This interesting feature here at the bottom is distinguishing English from other languages. If you're like me and you have multilingual tracks in your library, this can be useful or annoying, because essentially what it does is it lists all the English tracks first and then all the non-English tracks at the bottom. So I have it off because I'm used to navigating my library in that way. You might want to turn that on depending on your library setup. Then you have play mode, which is just shuffle, repeat, etc. Resume play from last is useful if you're an audiobook listener. None basically means you turn the player off, it's completely fresh, it doesn't know what you were playing. Track means you turn the player off, it will remember what song you were listening to, and it will put you at the beginning of that song when you power the player back up. And then position, again, if you're listening to an audiobook, will remember not only what song or track you were listening to when you turn the player off, but also where in said track you were on. So this feature is very important for audiobook listeners. Those do reduce standby battery life a little bit because it's having to remember where you were. I don't know by how much. I think it's a small amount, but the manufacturer did list that in their website, so I have to mention that here. Gapless playback is what it says on the tin. Sound field is a HiBy OS feature that sort of tries to give you some Dolby Atmos type, like a soundstage effect. I really don't like it very much, so I don't really mess with that. Maximum digital volume output is good for if you're pairing this with an external DAC and you will want to use that to adjust the volume instead of this. Crossfade, again, what it says on the tin. Replay gain, super useful if you have replay gain enabled on your tracks. It means you won't have to adjust the volume between your tracks or albums more often. I have that enabled on a good amount of my tracks, so I just have that on so I don't have to worry about a volume blowing my ears off, a track blowing my ears off after a very quiet one. Playthrough folders, if you hit a track in a folder, it will just go through the folder. Playthrough albums, same thing, but with albums. Speed play is what enables that speed control thing here. You can see that you have a half speed and a 2x speed, and you can choose what speed you want in sort of half or quarter speed increments. Lastly, there was the auto slide to playback interface, and what that means is basically if you are browsing through your songs or whatever and you pick one that you want to listen to, it automatically slides into the music playing interface, which is rather nice. The other option would be you just pick the song and you have to slide over manually, which is less expedient in my experience. Overall, this should be fairly typical for anyone who has any experience using a HiBy OS player. The interface overall, the menu options, the swipe to navigate, all the features like MSEB and the HiBy link and everything are classic HiBy OS. The only thing I will say about the user experience on this one that's different from, for example, the R1 is the size of the screen. It took a little bit of getting used to trying to hit all the little buttons and tabs and things for the on the screen here. It wasn't a huge deal after I got more practice, but what I will say is I did have more sort of fat finger mistakes with the V1 here than I did on the R1. That needs to get added to favorites. There we go. So see how that took 2 touches? I think it would have only taken 1 on the R1 just for the larger screen. Just know that any of my main touchscreen related complaints are due to the screen size, not HiBy OS. I definitely did have more fat finger mistakes with this than I did with the R1, but again, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. Let's go ahead and talk about how this player sounds. First thing I did, as usual, was do my subjective output impedance test. I will have a more electrical output impedance test at some point, but I'm working out a way I can do that repeatably and more easily. For now, though, I plugged in the Truthier Zero Blue 2 and the SimGot SuperMix 4. Both of those react quite strongly to output impedance. You can hear a difference in the sound on those fairly easily. I'm happy to report that the V1 here didn't meaningfully change the sound on either IEM, so the output impedance here is low enough that it really shouldn't affect things even on sensitive IEMs. Speaking of sensitive IEMs, I tested the noise floor using some of my most sensitive IEMs, and again, I didn't get any crazy hissing or noise in quieter moments of tracks or in between tracks. It was just fine, honestly. As far as overall sound quality goes, the V1 sounded to me like any other dual CS43131 device. So you have a CS43131 dual dongle that you have lying around. It's probably what the V1 is going to sound like. More importantly, it didn't get in the way of me or my music. It didn't make me dislike any of the tracks that I know I already love. And y'all know that's really all I care about. Don't ruin my music. Don't get between me and my music. So for comparisons today, I have the only other 2 players that I have that are under 100 US. I know there are a bunch of other like Android or non-Android enabled devices running Rockchip or Lumicil SoCs out there from a bunch of other brands, but these are the only 3 that I personally have in-house, and they're the only ones that I've driven for an extended period of time. And I do think that this is the most apt comparison here because the R1 and the Echo Mini are what I see as the main competition for the V1 here. So let's get into it. We'll start things off with the Echo Mini from Snowsky, priced at $60 US. This is the outlier of the 3 players that we'll be looking at today because it's not running HiBy OS. This has the exact same dual Cirrus Logic DAC setup that the V1 has, and this puts out a bit more listed output power as well. Battery life on this, however, isn't as good, but that's due to a combination of the higher output power and a smaller overall battery. For me personally, the thing that will make me choose the V1 over the Echo Mini every time is the separate volume and transport controls. Having the controls on the Echo Mini here be shared between volume and sort of playback, sort of transport functions, is a kind of awkward way to do the controls here. I really wish they would have put a volume dial on here, as I said in my full review for this. Being able to drive the V1 easily while it's sitting in a pocket is a big deal for me personally. The fact that you can navigate this with a touchscreen is also nice, as this, even though it does have a nice screen that's basically the same size, isn't touch at all. It's just visual. In addition, the V1 can handle 2 terabyte SD cards, while the Echo maxes out at 256 gigabytes, which for libraries of my size means I can only carry around a subset of my music here versus almost all of it here. The Snowsky, however, is a good $20 cheaper than the V1 these days, so if cost and retro stylings are your main purchase considerations, I think the Echo Mini, for all of its flaws, is still a pretty good little device. Personally, however, I would shell out the extra $20 for the V1. But how about what I think is the V1's main competitor, the tiny little HiBy R1, priced at $85 US. Both of these devices run HiBy OS, both of them have color touchscreens, both support 2 terabyte cards, both have excellent battery life, although I will say the battery life contest did go to the HiBy R1. I managed 14 hours with this on the KPH30i at high gain versus 12 on the V1 here. And the R1 is doing that with a smaller battery and a bigger screen. Those extra hours of battery life are probably down to this only having one CS43131 versus the dual CS131s on this. This also does not have a balanced output on it, whereas this does. What that means is this has a good bit more output power, basically twice as much as the R1 has. That means this will give you a chance at running some of those more demanding headphones, whereas this kind of struggles with that. This just has twice the horsepower. As I mentioned earlier, the larger screen here on the R1 does make for less fat finger mistakes compared to the one on the V1, and the screen to body ratio, as I showed you earlier, is just much more satisfying on the R1 here compared to the V1. However, what makes me choose the V1 over the R1, again, is how much easier this is to operate in a pocket thanks to its separate transport and volume controls. There they are. The R1 does not have full transport controls. You have volume up and down, which is nice to have, but then you have this sort of awkward arrangement here between what is play pause and next track. There's no previous track, meaning that I have to unlock the player and hit the screen in order to go back one, whereas on the V1, it's a simple button press that I can do in a pocket. The button layout on its own would make me choose the V1, but even with more demanding headphones, the battery life on the V1 is still great. While the screen is more mistake prone, I'm willing to put up with that as in exchange for the better controls and the more output power. And that's going to lead me neatly into the recommendation section. Of the sub $100 players I have tried, and I acknowledge that is not very many, the Variations V1 is probably the most complete and well-rounded digital audio player under $100 that I have tried. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. The screen-to-body ratio is an absolute bummer. The battery life could be better. The sort of lack of a volume wheel is a personal thing. I prefer a knob or a wheel for volume. It just feels more tactile to me. But then again, no player is perfect. The firmware issues are probably the biggest issue here. While version 1.1 has solved many of the bugs, I have still read reports of there still being issues with version 1.1. All we can do is hope that a version 1.2 will fix things down the line. Again, however, my experience with both version 1 and version 1.1 has been largely trouble-free, and thanks to the free clip case that I got with it, this has essentially been my go-to default player for going on walks nowadays. I'm going to be giving this a rating of "This is brilliant," but I will promise to try and get my hands on some other sub $100 players to compare this with. Which ones do you want to see? Leave me some suggestions down in the comments. I have a lot of fun doing player videos. They take a little longer, but they're kind of like car reviews. I got to move in and get to know it first and use it for a good bit before I try to form my opinion here. Essentially speaking, if you want a non-Android audio player under $100 and you like HiBy OS, the V1 should be at the top of your list. It is one of the most well-rounded players I've dealt with, and it's priced right in line with the competition while offering a more versatile player than they do with more output power than the main competition. But that's enough yapping for now. I've got one more player review coming up soon after this one, but in between that and this, I have a really quick showcase video on Dakoni's new MagDAC DAC Pocket, so go ahead and look forward to that one. And then after that, we'll have another player review for you guys. But for now, as usual, thank you all so very much for watching. Huge shout out to my Compadres Club members. Remember, $5 a month and you get to decide what I review with your money, and you help make the channel more independent and less reliant on samples and tour units, which I really appreciate. I really hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you all so very much for watching. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I'll catch y'all next time.